everybody! Today we're going to be making a guitar effects pedal board, so let's get into it.
First, I start off by planing all of the boards I'll be using for this project. Don't forget your safety equipment. Then I mark out my measurements for the length of the boards. If you want to see the plan for this project so you can recreate it yourself, I'll be adding it to the end of the video, so feel free to take a screenshot and give it a try. You're also totally welcome to make any adjustments that will make this effects pedal board perfect for your setup. I'd love to see your results, so if you end up making this, please send it to me over on Instagram. Next, I cut down all of my wood to the right length for my project using a compound sliding miter saw. I should have extended the support here so the board didn't tip down when I cut it. Having pieces shifting around can make issues like kickback more likely, so it's definitely something to be mindful of. I make sure to take into account the width of the material that the saw blade will remove before I make the cut. An easy way to check this is to run the saw blade over your piece without turning it on. This way you can visually see where the blade will run. I really like this technique. It's quick and easy, and it saves you from the pain of cutting too short and having to start over and waste the wood. Although I save any usable scrap for future projects, I prefer not to go down that road if I can help it. When I made my measurements, I left a few extra millimeters so I could trim off the rough ends as well. Next, I get everything trimmed to the right width by running them through the table saw. Here I'm doing the two bars acting as the outside of the frame. I make these fairly thick as they'll be helping to hold the structure together. I also cut a third, more narrow piece which will act like a central support connecting all the planks together. It also adds an extra anchor or point of support for holding on the faceplate. Next, I will be cutting the legs. I'll be cutting an angle into one end of the legs so that everything sits flat and even. To cut on a vertical angle, start by loosening the screw on the back of the saw. After doing this, you can change the angle of the blade. Once I've tightened it back into place and my safety equipment is on, I'm ready to cut my angles. I cut both legs in one block. Then I mark off the width, which I trace from the sidebars. This is an easy way to make sure that the angles are identical. Then there won't be any wobble on the pedal board once it's built and sitting on the ground. Once I have that done, it's time to start assembly. I start with the outer frame, gluing the legs to the support bars. Then I add some glue to attach the first beam. I wipe away any excess glue before it dries. Then I carefully lay the board into place. Now I can make any necessary adjustments to get everything all squared up. To check that all the gaps will be equal, I assemble everything so that I can get all the measurements. I could also have done this before adding the glue, but it felt easier to apply the glue first without having extra pieces to work around. Although I don't have footage of this, I added an angle to the back of the legs to help it sit flat. It gives it more contact with the ground. The process was to sand it down to the line I needed on the belt sander. Once everything is in place, I start attaching the boards, adding glue as I go. I start by pre-drilling the holes to prevent the wood from splitting. And I use a drill bit slightly smaller than the size of the screws for a secure fit. I thought about drilling both holes but decided to add the screw first to keep the wood from sliding. Glue is a bit slippery and the piece is sloped. On this spot I use a long screw to help stabilize everything by sinking deep into the leg. Tighten in the screw so it sits flush. I often hide screws in my work, but I visualized this design as more of a modern industrial theme. I felt that leaving the visual screws added character. Then I repeat the process for the next screws, being mindful of the depth of the wood so as not to go right through by drilling too deeply. I also check the depth of the next hole, and I marked my drill bit with some tape off screen. I've also selected a shorter screw for these areas as well. After securing that side, I move on to the other side, gently lifting up the board to apply the glue. I could have done this when I glued the other side, but I thought it would make it more likely to slide around without the friction of the one dry side resting against the wood underneath it. I double check my measurements before I commit to driving in the screw to make sure both sides are aligned and that nothing is shifted. As I go, I also make sure to wipe away any glue that squeezes out from between the wood when it tightens down. Now that I have my first screw, I use a square to line up where I want the screws to go to keep things clean and tidy. It looks nice when the screws are all straight and centered, and it keeps the support where it needs to be and prevents me from coming out the sides of the wood. I repeat these steps, and for the bottom screw, I do it on an angle. This helps me to be able to drive deeper into the wood, even though it's at its thinnest point. Once everything is set up and ready to go, I check that both sides are evenly spaced and everything's where it needs to be. Measuring tape would be more precise, but this just happens to be exactly the right size. Then I carry on, repeating the same steps as before. You can see the clamp here because I caused a screw to split the wood slightly. I repaired it by adding some glue, easing back the screw, and adding a clamp to put on pressure. In the future, I may do a video on repair, but today it was out of frame and not really the focus of my video, so I clean up the glue and continue. The next step is to add the faceplate. Once I've added the glue, I line up the board and clamp it into place before I drill it in. This lets me focus on what I'm doing without having to hold the board up at the same time. I had a bit of trouble screwing this one in. The top clamp from the repair was getting in the way, and the screwdriver being crooked was causing the bit to skip. Once the board is secured with the first screw, I can remove the clamps to get them out of the way. And then I continue attaching the front. Then I flip the whole thing over and line up the support beam in the center. I check the depth that I will need to pre-drill and add my glue. After that, I carefully line everything up. Then I secure it into place. At this point, it's good to be especially careful of the depth. If I were to drill too deep here, the hole would come out the top of the board, which would be impossible to hide. Next, I carefully measure and mark where the center beam lies from the front. Then I attach the face to that as well, being mindful of keeping the drill at a 90-degree angle. This provides extra support for the faceplate and structure to the frame as a whole. It's a small target though, so I have to be extra careful. Then I give everything a good sand with the detail sander. I try to get the edges in between the boards to create a clean, smooth line. Beveling the edges also increases durability in the corners. It also prevents splinters and gives a polished look. To keep it brief, I only took a short clip of the sanding. In reality, I spent some time on this, slowly progressing from a rough to a smooth grit. For comparison, here's how it looked before sanding, and here's how it looked after sanding. After sanding and ensuring that all the glue was completely dry, I gave it 3 coats of paint, spray paint specifically. And here's the finished Guitar Effects pedal board. And this is a photo the client sent of his setup on the pedal board. Here's a copy of the design that I used, including measurements. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section, and feel free to pause the video if you want to take a look. Thanks for watching. Bye!